Jordan. On top of the royal palace in Amman, the national flag blows fitfully in the breeze, symbolic perhaps of King Hussein's faltering rule over his stricken and divided country. Last week, the king approved the formation of a new cabinet, 8 of whose members are Palestinians who actively support the aims of Arab guerrilla organizations in Jordan. It was the latest in a long line of concessions which the king's been forced to make to the guerrillas in face of their increasing power and influence within the state. On 2 occasions in the last 6 months, Jordan's been brought to the verge of civil war as guerrilla troops and units of the Jordanian army have clashed in the streets of Amman. The Palestine guerrilla movement sprang up in the wake of the Arabs' crushing defeat in the Six-Day War, when the west bank of the Jordan was lost to Israel. There are now a dozen separate organizations dedicated to the overthrow of Israel by armed force and the restoration of a Palestine state. Most of them are left-wing, and Mao Zedong's handbook on guerrilla warfare is compulsory reading for old and young alike. The most powerful of all the resistance groups is Al-Fatah, with a membership of about 10,000. In its elaborate training sessions arranged for new recruits, even the very young soon get acquainted with the realities of war. Leader of the Al-Fatah, and unquestionably the most influential man in the whole guerrilla movement, is Yasser Arafat. Politically, he's a moderate, and it's largely because of his relationship with King Hussein that the guerrillas agreed to a ceasefire with the Jordanian army. Over the last few years, Arafat's built up the military strength of Al-Fatah to a point where it compares favorably with regular armies of some Arab states. The fully trained guerrillas know how to use the latest Russian arms.
Good! Another! Very good! Good!
Besides the Kalashnikov submachine gun, the guerrillas also have Katyusha rockets and modern transport and communications systems. The guerrillas draw their support from the thousands of Palestinians who were driven from the West Bank during the war and who now live in huge refugee camps in Jordan. There are frustrated people who've lost faith in the methods and abilities of Arab governments, and for whom the guerrillas' doctrine of armed conflict with Israel has an understandable appeal. The guerrillas have set up their own administration in the camps, which are now in effect a state within a state. This open flaunting of Jordanian authority led to a crisis in February when the guerrillas refused to comply with government security measures banning the carrying of arms in public. When Arafat and Hussein finally came to an agreement, it was the king who had to give way.
Unfortunately, there was misunderstanding. This could have caused the opposite aim of that of the government of Jordan. Had we faced the situation rashly, and instead of solidifying our front, there might indeed have been a very regrettable situation.
To preserve peace in the streets of Amman, the king ordered the withdrawal of all the security measures. In return, Arafat agreed that the guerrillas would be more discreet in their activities and promised to exercise a greater degree of discipline over them. With this compromise in force, Amman returned to normal, but it was clear to all objective observers that King Hussein was now unable to exert his authority over the Palestinians, who accounted for half of Jordan's population. For 4 months, the guerrillas and the Jordanian government succeeded in coexisting, and at the beginning of June, contingents from both sides joined together in a peaceful demonstration to mark the 3rd anniversary of the Six-Day War. It was an alliance that proved impossible to maintain because of the activities of extremists on both sides. When a shooting incident between guerrillas and Jordanian special forces took place in a northern suburb of Amman, the whole city was quickly engulfed by fierce fighting. As the battle raged, troops of the extreme left-wing Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine held 40 foreigners hostage in the Intercontinental Hotel, which they threatened to blow up unless the government agreed to their demands. The hostages were released when King Hussein agreed to accept the resignation of his uncle, who was commander of Jordan's armed forces, and another high-ranking officer. American civilians working in Amman were advised to leave the capital with their families as soon as they could. Most of them flew out to Beirut as soon as the fighting stopped. Behind them, they left a city littered with the debris of war. It's thought that more than 300 people were killed in the fighting and at least 700 wounded. One of the casualties was the assistant military attaché at the United States Embassy, who was shot dead when guerrillas broke into his home. Out of the chaos came yet another compromise between Arafat and King Hussein. The guerrilla leader claimed he didn't want the overthrow of the monarchy in Jordan, as this could only lead to anarchy in which the ultimate aim of Palestine liberation might well be lost sight of. But he was in no doubt that the guerrillas had prevented the Jordanian army from taking Amman.
I can assure you that our fighters and myself, playing my little role with them, have been able to face the tanks and prevent it from penetrating or entering in the capital.
As leader of the guerrillas, Arafat's problem is similar to King Hussein's. Both men have to control extremists in their own ranks. One such man on the guerrilla side is Naif Hawatmeh, leader of a splinter group known as the Democratic Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, an extreme Marxist organization that believes revolution in the Arab countries is just as important as war against Israel. Hawatmeh believes the recent confrontation was planned by King Hussein's government. He explained his views through an interpreter.
The reactionary regime in Jordan has been planning this confrontation ever since the end of the 10th of February crisis. This regime has been mobilizing all its military and political powers in order to bring them into the confrontation. It adopted the policy of military encirclement of the armed struggle waged by the Palestinian resistance all along the ceasefire lines. It also adopted the policy of political encirclement by inflaming provincial and tribal feuds and by encouraging splits and divisions amongst the Palestinian Jordanian people.
But for the moment, the splits and divisions seem to have been healed by King Hussein's latest concessions. A few days after fighting each other, guerrillas and Jordanian army soldiers were touring Amman together in the same jeeps. The tension relaxed and people went about their daily business as the capital returned to normal. It was clear to both King Hussein and the guerrilla leaders that the temporary truce between them had to be made permanent if they were to coexist for more than a few months. And so a few days after the fighting in Amman ended, King Hussein flew to Cairo to meet President Nasser for talks about the guerrillas' role in general Arab strategy in the Middle East. The two heads of state were joined by the Syrian leader Nureddin al-Atassi and later by Iraq's President Bakr. The four men then flew to Tripoli in Libya, where they agreed that a four-nation Arab committee should visit Jordan to work out a permanent relationship between the Jordanian government and the guerrilla organizations. The commission arrived in Jordan at the end of June. It consisted of Algerian, Egyptian, Libyan and Sudanese delegates. The fact that it was created at all is an indication of how seriously the Arab governments view the guerrilla threat. For King Hussein has no doubt told his fellow rulers that if they refuse to support him now and let the guerrillas take over Jordan, they'll pay the same price themselves later on. The growing power of the guerrillas could be the spur that forces Iraq and Syria to set up an effective joint command that will pose a real military threat to Israel. If this happens, the guerrillas' appeal would be less attractive. If it doesn't, King Hussein will have to decide whether to crush the guerrillas once and for all or abdicate all authority to them. At a recent press conference, he didn't seem prepared to give in.
Regarding the resistance, it could never survive without the support of the people, without the support of the army. And in these two areas, wedges were driven. I am firmly convinced that what has happened is not an accident. And as I've said, my position during these last few days has been that of a person walking in a minefield. I've done my utmost to prevent the complete destruction of everything I built, of everything I love, of my life, in fact. If I'm unable to organize and mobilize all the resources of my people, I believe they are with me in this aim and towards our common objectives. And I'm not the type of person who can quit. This nation is a part of me and I'm a part of it, and so is my family. I've always fought its battles, and will do so to the end.